Hi guys, how are you? So let's cover today's editorial analysis of the newspaper, and today is 21st of January 2017. It will be presented to you by me, Dipanshu Singh. Well, you can read more about me on this slide. You can also follow me on Academy on this link, and do rate and review the course and recommend it to your friends. So the agenda for today is that we'll be covering these three articles. Two of them are quite long, and nothing in fact from today's live mint. And there was also not much in today's Hindu. Only this article is important because it has a lot of references about Jallikattu from the ancient period, so which in turns inevitably becomes important for our exam. So the practice question for today is: discuss the causes for the rise in inequality across the world and suggest measures to address them. So use the Unacademy Discuss site to answer the daily practice questions. And so the first article for today talks about the rising inequality and the trends in inequality, the global order. This was based on a study by Oxfam and a report based on from the Oxfam. So the emergence of Trump as president, and then the referendum of Brexit, anti-migration sentiments in Europe, emergence of right-wing parties, and deteriorating conditions of women workforce, radical political ideas were actually thought of that they have been discarded, but they're actually now gaining momentum again. So all these phenomena basically have a one common string among them, that is the ailing globalization being propelled by mob to capitalism, leading to unbearable inequality. So basically the influence of rising capitalism is leading to an unbearable rise in inequality, and at the same time everybody is miffed and is not too keen now about this concept of so-called globalization. It is a time of anti-globalization, in fact. So that is what was the agenda for Donald Trump as well, and the Brexit. So this actually does not mean that the protectionism or socialism is actually a cure to the sailing system. If you see the example of Venezuela, where it was utilized, or rather than it was implemented, was not very successful. So the Oxfam study, the report says that it just takes 8 richest people of the world to own the total wealth of the bottom 50% of the world people. And between 1998 to 2011, income of the poorest 10% increased only by $3 per year, but top 10% it was $11,800. That is staggeringly 182 times more than that of the poorest. So can you imagine that? And in other words, exactly, if you think concentration of wealth is at alarming level, where rich is again becoming richer and the poor is becoming poorer day by day. Very famous quote also in the same context by Karl Marx. So reasons for this inequality is that the influence of the government policy, and the second is the crony capitalism. Obviously, if you favor your relatives or your friends, so that is one of the form of cronyism. So Oxfam found that for one of the thirds of world's billionaire wealth is derived from inherited property, and another 43% can be linked to cronyism, if giving undue favors. So that is why the very famous economist Thomas Piketty, by the way, his book is amazing. You should definitely read it if you have time for it, but it's a very good book. Gives a lot of idea about the inequality in 21st century. That's what the name of the book is. Anyway, he advocated for inheritance tax on billionaires. So meanwhile, women workers are at a severe phase of economic repression, where their income is shrinking on the other hand, and on the other hand, there is also an unequal access to social protection. So they are neither getting social protection from the authorities, and neither their income levels are rising. So while profits of the companies are at all-time high, its share among workers is decreasing. Moreover, these companies manipulate tax system to evade the taxes, in spite of the government's efforts of DTA, double taxation avoiding agreement, or other slew of measures. These companies always find a loophole in certain laws or acts to bypass these laws for their own benefit. And intensive lobbying by rich organizations and individuals lead to the policy designing which is pro-cronism and rather than pro-poor. And this obviously leads to concentration of wealth on one hand, and the cash-starved state and the people on the other. So even there were some strategies which have been suggested by Oxfam, which requires national policies and international collaborations. First is setting up higher minimum wages, which is an idea that a lot of governments in the world are tinkering with. And the other is universal social protection, schemes like MG Narega and Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana and the Atal Pension Yojana. These all and the rural health mission or the urban housing missions. These all basically give the social protection to the needy. So they need to be reformed and strengthened and implemented in a better way. And equitable tax policies. Obviously, the super rich need to pay more taxes. Then regulating companies to produce sustainable protection and prevent exploitation. And moving away from a simplistic notion of GDP growth to improving conditions of the bottom half. So GDP growth won't work until it has a trickle-down effect. You should remember the lines of Mahatma Gandhi that the benefit should be given to the last person standing on the line, that is Antodaya. So that is why we should always think of the GDP growth in terms of the what all benefits is it going to do, for the last person standing in that queue and the bottom half of our population. The next article is about no more commentaries. So this article talks about the what is ailing our defense establishment and the preparedness in the light of cold start doctrine. So we have already covered about cold start doctrine. This is just a brief up, maybe a revision kind of for cold start, but otherwise, what are the other issues that in our armed forces are facing? So Indian government has on record denied any presence of cold start. Sorry for the typo over here. It should be cold start doctrine. And the recent usage of this term by the army chiefs has actually ruffled many feathers. So why army chief had to officially use this term? Because 2015 was a landmark year in the era of defense, and there were a lot of alliances, and China siding with Pakistan, and then Russia also coming very close with China. And on the other hand, India had maintained a deafening silence since past 70 years on this doctrine. And this obviously leads to an awkward response, usually gives rise to a security dilemma. In order to have a nationwide discussion on military strategy, and in order to avoid this dilemma, Army Chief used this term as India's pacifist tradition had mutated into a strategic restraint. So what is this strategic security dilemma? So action by one state is actually, if India takes certain actions to heighten up its security, it is seen as a provocation by the other state or the adversary state, that is Pakistan. And obviously the other nation tries to build up its military resources, and this creates a kind of a vicious circle which keeps on going, and it leads to an inevitable rise and increase in tension that may provoke a conflict. So what is the cold start doctrine? So basically this is a quick mobilization of military employing maneuver shot warfare, which is done in swiftly capturing the enemy post. It is different from the attrition warfare of World War era, in which maximum damage rather than control of any enemy military outpost was done. So in the World War era, the focus was on maximum damage rather than control, but in cold start doctrine is more about capturing the enemy post as swiftly as possible. And historically speaking, the cold start was required after the Indian Army's failure in mobilizing troops opposed to the attacks on Parliament. It took jaw-dropping 3 weeks to put army, and that to strike corps. So that is why cold doctrine was thought of, and now integrated battalion groups are thought of, that they will be mobilized within 48 to 72 hours under this doctrine. But then it will also focus on that there's a coordination between the armory, artillery and aviation that could swiftly respond to Pakistan's provocation without crossing the nuclear threshold. This is important, that we will not allow under this doctrine that the war goes up to that level, that it crosses the nuclear threshold. So what is the difference between a surgical strike and a cold start? Surgical strike is basically an intended legitimate target, attack on an intended legitimate target with minimum collateral in the sense a minimum damage to our side, while military will recede back after success of operations. So if you follow the news, you must be aware about a lot of this thing. What is a surgical strike? Even there was a question in this year's mains, last year's mains as well. So while cold start is actually departure from the Sundarji doctrine, it is kind of a limited war doctrine that is aimed for retaliatory conventionally strike. Basically, you go after the enemy state after it has committed some kind of not to say crime, but then obviously some kind of thing which some kind of say a military strike or short military strike or a terrorist attack which has been carried out by your adversary state. So it will while surgical strike is more of a punishing, has an aim of punishing, cold start has a strategic dimension that is more for a deterrence for Pakistan's misadventures. However, official India has never endorsed this position. So there are some pertinent questions that needs to be answered in the terms of the national security discourse. Apart from this cold start doctrine, first is obviously on the languid and capricious decision making. This is basically the delay in taking quick decisions at the army level. So we need to address these issues in the Ministry of Defence and the bureaucratic delays which plague the decision making in the Indian Army or the Indian Armed Forces rather. So the answer lies in integrating these three armed headquarters with the Minister of Defence so that the talent is pooled and military experts and civil servants work harmoniously in synergy, and decision making therefore there would have more of a transformative effect. The next question is regarding on the discrete functioning of the Army, Navy and Air Force. There is a problem of intercoordination among these forces. So not only in the context of the cold start, but also to employ commonality in training, warfare equipment, as well as synergy in warfare. So the answer would be to this question will be in creating an institution of the chief of a defense staff like who will advise will work on the advice of these three service chiefs, and would obviously give military advice then to the defense minister. He will work with the defense secretary to give advice to defense minister and the prime minister of India on policy issues. And third is the question regarding India's half-empty arsenals, which calls for a drastic change in Indian military-industrial complex. So there are bureaucratic delays, I told you, and there are problems with the research and development in the DRDO, and therefore we need to look on these organizations on a more pragmatic level. So answer lies in major overhaul in the form of creation of a Ministry of Defense Technology and Industrial Production as a separate entity, separate from the Ministry of Defense, which will comprise of junior minister and three chiefs, which will help in developing land, maritime, and air systems. Now it will obviously oversee clusters composed of research laboratories and production units, and also FDI and Make in India and Defense will help whenever necessary in this separate ministry. The last one is about Jallikattu. So a lot of issues regarding it. I'm not going to dwell too much into it because there are obviously emotions flying all over for this issue. But then we'll look at this issue also in a very pragmatic manner on why this article is particularly important for our exams point of view, because first and foremost, UPSC always has a bias towards history questions, and that too from South India. So a lot of questions are asked from your Tamil Nadu NCERT textbooks. So this article basically, this article talks about Jallikattu and the reference which has from the ancient Tamil text. So it has reference from the Sangam literature. So we'll go for the timeline for the literary works. So first one is the rock art forms of Jallikattu in the ancient time. Then there's Sangad period literature of the Kali Tukai. And then 1893 there was from Kamalambal Charitharam, then Manji Viratu, Tillanna Mohanambal, and then in 1970s, there was a movie based on the novel by Rao Bahadur Singram, and then Vadi Vasal, and then 1980 Muratu Akalai. So Kalikotai, belongs to the age of Sangam literature. It comprises of 5 long poems and provides first elaborate description of this ancient sport. So this basically poem depicts the mood of the sport, where young men are decked in colorful flowers and they embrace the bull and tame the bull. And young women who watch this, the focus of the poem is on the valor and the gore that accompanies this heroic feat. So the reference is on the pastoral zone, but now it is Madurai and Tirunelveli. And the young men and women belong to the community of shepherds, now identified with Idiyar, Konar, and Yadavar. Now the Kamalambal Charitaram was the English translation for this is The Fatal Rumor. It is by Rajanam Iyer, who is a disciple of Swami Vivekananda, and he records his technical terms associated with this sport, mentions about the celebrations of the sport with men and young women turning up in huge numbers. The next one is regarding the Manji Viratu, which is by Subbu or Kalaimani. So it is actually a short story which has records of practice of giving endearing names to the bull. It also, the crux of the story reflects the conflicts between the Agumadayar and the Maravar caste, ending in violence and the suspension of the festival until it is restored by the advent of the Gandhian movement. So this is also particularly very important. So it depicts the sport being celebrated in the valorous sport of Tamils. And then he also wrote a novel, Tillanna Mohanambal, and there was a movie made by on the story of the Rao Bahadur Singram, which talks about a romance between a young girl who raises a bull and a youth who sets out to tame it. Then Vadi Vasal is an English translation. The English translation of this is The Arena. It was written by Chilappa, and the locus. It is considered as a locus classic of Jallikattu. It has been out of print for quite some time, but then it holds the sport and expands it into exploration of the conflicts between man and animal. And Jallikattu paintings, which were published in these literary works, were by the Adimulam and Marudu. And M. Kathiresanan Chettiar provided an intellectual framework for this sport. And now Muratu Kalai is a famous movie which starred Rajinikanth. Well, he does not need any introduction. So if you see all these authors mentioned above were Brahmins, so this actually falsifies the common argument that the sport is the preserve of a few dominant castes. It involves all the caste and community and people from all socio-economic status. So thus, as a now corporatized, the communitarian sport, Jallikattu incorporates the entire social order. So why, in this particular context, in the present time, why there are reasons that the Tamilians unite when it comes to Jallikattu? Because they are animal lovers, and they are met with the insensitive central government and state government and the agenda of Hindutva and of the impersonal forces of globalization. So Jallikattu has now become a symbol of Tamil cultural pride, and the Alangalur being the tourist spot of this sport. So irrespective of the decision, there's no doubt that the protesters have actually won, but this triumphant moment also calls for introspection, because the environmental groups are seeking to preserve the native breeds, and Jallikattu enthusiasts should also think about regulating the sports and also protecting the animals from any cruelty and ensure safety of the spectators. So the democratic character of this protest should also be reflected in the Jallikattu itself by making it more inclusive, with the participation of people from all communities and society, participation of all the highs and lows and the dominant and the oppressed. So this is it for today, guys. I hope you like this the video. Do tell me your suggestions. So till next video, I hope you have a good day. Thank you so much.